feel so silly having so many microphones. It's such a small room. But I don't know everybody in this room, actually. We've met before. We met when you first started. But I want to say your name. I think it's something with an... That's it. But I don't know you. Sorry. I'm Matthew. But yeah, I was about to say I got asked to do this, but I guess I kind of forced myself into the program, actually. So today, for Matilda seminar, the method seminar, I'm going to talk about the stuff I've started been doing. And I've got some of my colleagues back in the UK watching this, so no pressure. But yeah, how am I using sociology to understand sport-related concussion, or in Norwegian, hjernerystelse, which I kind of like because that directly translates to brain shake. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So I'm not going to spend too much detail talking about concussion per se, because obviously this is a method seminar, but I do want to give some context because I think it's super important. So just to set the scene, these are some of, I don't know if I can use the word colleagues, just people I pester on WhatsApp on a daily basis about this stuff. Chris and Jack. I guess you could say I'm starting to work quite closely with them both about various things. Coincidentally, just in the last month, I've had something accepted with both of these people, two separate bits. And I'll talk a little bit about one of those projects in a minute. But yeah, I guess I'm broadly just heavily influenced by what they do as sociologists, health sociologists, sports sociologists. And I think I've been talking to Chris just on Twitter since about 2020. I think it actually started with an argument about COVID, and now we've ended up being colleagues in some way. So that's kind of funny. And I've basically just been very heavily influenced by his work. I really buy into what he does, and his messages, which are in his books. They're actually available in the library, but not so much. But Chris will be talking in Gunn's seminar tomorrow. This book is, I should get a commission for this. This book is coming out very soon. That's what Chris will be talking about tomorrow for those of you that are in Gunn's research group. But yeah, these two work in Nottingham, in the UK, Nottingham Trent, and these are the two people I guess I'm working most closely with. There's a broader team who I bounce ideas off, but essentially anything what I'm doing related to concussion in sport, I'm essentially working with these two. And the reason why I bring it up is because, like I said, I was just generally chit-chatting on various social media platforms with Chris, and I was kind of bragging about this idea that I've started a rugby club in essentially the middle of nowhere in Sogndal, which has been difficult to do, and it's something I've been pretty proud of. But I now have quite conflicting views about it for various reasons, which I'll get into soon. And just through general conversations, Chris said a couple of things to me, I guess in WhatsApp on an audio note, because I don't think we've ever actually spoke synchronously, maybe a couple of times. And I'm, as some of you are aware, I'm like the head coach in Sogndal Rugby Club. I coach people from the age of, I guess, 10 to over 40. We're playing various different forms of rugby. I do it with a guy called Mike, who's the guy who's just smashing me on that picture. And we've helped people go, say, for example, playing Bergen with their rugby club, which is more established. As an example, we've got kids who 17, 18 years old who've played adult rugby with us. And the reason I bring that up is because one of them has had a brain injury, and I got faced with this question, but if I'm the coach who's introduced that sport to that person, who in Norway would have never have heard of that until I came on the scene, am I effectively complicit in that person sustaining a brain injury? I think quite straightforwardly, yeah, the answer is yes. And then to follow that up, as me as a player as well, I've now retired, but I was asked another question by Chris, like, why would you do this sport if it means you potentially can't be a parent to your kids? I don't think there's ever a logical, rational way to answer that other than saying, that's probably a bad idea. So I didn't really know anything about the long-term implications of playing full contact sport. really until the last couple of years. I'd heard of this guy. This is a guy called Steve Thompson who played for England in the early 2000s, the first wave of professional rugby players. Rugby only turned professional in the mid-90s, so he was that first kind of wave of professionalism. And he's got early onset dementia. He's been diagnosed with dementia in his 40s. And the only reason I knew about this is because it's become quite a high-profile case to do with a legal case. Funnily enough, he's actually one of the people late to this legal case, but because of his status as a World Cup winner, he's been quite heavily publicised. And that's the first thing I'd ever heard about this. Like, dementia from playing rugby? What? And obviously you get your head into the literature because I've been given that dilemma by Chris. I'm reading stuff like this, and when I start to explore this, when I start to, I guess I've got a pretty good understanding now of what's going on with our brains when we play contact sports. And when we say contact, it could be something like ice hockey, which is obviously played in Norway. Anything with full body contact. I guess we traditionally, historically, assume we're talking about boxing, kickboxing, obvious strikes to the head. But we're talking about, I guess you can use the term impact sport as well. When there's a direct collision with two bodies, I think broadly a lot of people understand or have at least heard of the term concussion, and how we can define it is, well, I'm not going to read that, you can read that in your own time, and also I can't actually see it because of my Zoom thing, but most people, when you ask them what concussion is, they can make links to the brain. Oh, it's your brain being shaken around. Like I said in Norwegian, it literally translates to shaking of the brain. So yeah, it's a brain injury caused by a blow to the head. I was pretty aware of that for various reasons, which I'll get into in a minute. I wasn't really appreciative or understanding what brain damage can be in terms of sport. And this is a phrase we've used in a paper that Jack led, actually. And what's really interesting, or that's the wrong word to use, interesting, important to understand, is brain damage can be caused by movement in the brain or movement of the brain in the head that might not cause symptoms. This repetitiveness from the impact sport can cause brain damage. And that's where the literature's at, where these routine collisions that you might not feel instantly after the specific incident can cause significant long-term neurological disorder. And this is stuff I've been telling the students. I've not mean to be trying to scare them. This is when I've been teaching them about research methods and why I'm doing this stuff. But there's fairly clear links now in the literature that brain injury sustained from repetitive contacts over a long period of time can lead to dementia. It can lead to a very specific type of dementia called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which is kind of becoming mainstream if you watch stuff like NFL or UFC. Symptoms of depression, ideas of killing yourself, so suicidality, and cognitive impairment. So there's some serious issues that come from basically banging your head a lot, of which rugby is a sport where it's an inherent part of the game. It's the same way it would be with kickboxing, boxing, American football, ice hockey. And I mentioned something called CTE. It's essentially a type of dementia that's only really present in people who have either worked in the military, played contact sports, or been victims of domestic abuse. It's a brain injury we can only fully diagnose when people have died. We have to cut the brain in half and look at protein content in the brain. So it's a real issue. This is a public health issue. Authorities in France, for example, where rugby's played a lot, they've openly considered brain injury and sport-related concussion a public health issue. So, right, let's get into some actual methods. And so that's the context for me, right? Brain injury in rugby, as a player, as a coach, as someone who's in the field. And the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because if you look at some of the existing literature, a lot of it is survey-based, a lot of it is very, I don't want to say the word narrow-minded, narrow-focused, okay? We call these, and what Chris has called these, is like snapshot methods, okay? you might be familiar with the idea of like a cross-sectional method, right? Just a very instantaneous moment in time. So what a lot of the literature has tried to do is tried to develop an understanding of sports people's understanding with very limited methods. How can I say snapshot in Norwegian? Øyeblikkelig, like in the moment, momentarily, okay, like instantaneous. And we're fairly critical of that. I'm fairly critical of that. Tom Eric knows I'm fairly critical of these types of methods. And I think you know that. Did you call me a survey skeptic the other day or something along those lines? That would be accurate. We don't capture anywhere near the amount of nuance that's involved. And I'm going to present some data from my project that shows how much more nuanced understanding can be. And just to kind of do a bit of a plug-in, I told you I've been doing some stuff with both Chris and Jack. Just this month, we had this paper accepted. Basically, it's bachelor Gava and a master's project around biobanding. Don't worry about that. If you're really interested, listen to the podcast which comes out in 2 weeks' time, Idrettsforskning, where we talk about it. But very briefly, the paper is about this idea of, I guess, what Chris has called methodological artifacts. So what we mean is surveys, which are traditionally used to understand rugby players' understanding of concussion, they don't actually measure examine, investigate what's going on. There's a misalignment with the tool, so a survey, and the object of the study. And we've shown that with some evidence from some research here. So we're very critical about the use of surveys. We think they're fairly limited, and we think it's very limited, and I think it's very limited in this particular context, which is why we should try to move towards more sociologically informed ideas when trying to understand why people might do very dangerous things, or why they don't do those things, or whether they even understand if it's dangerous in the first place. So, this is a really cool paper. I feel like I'm just plagiarizing Chris today. I guess I am actually. So, to kind of encapsulate what I've just been talking about, I highly recommend you read this paper, even if you don't have an interest in concussion, just more about having an interest in epistemology and thinking and reflecting about what we're doing. It's a really cool paper about how people understand things, and basically how our understanding of a topic changes. It changes over time. It's not static. We don't really have static knowledge or understanding of a topic, do we? And the example I use with students and colleagues is just think about, like, you may have not seen a film for about 10 years, and then you watch it again and you start seeing things like, oh, wow, I didn't think about that the first time, or, oh, I can't believe I've even got away with this, or you can tell when a film's been filmed in the 90s or whatever. The point is, through time, we essentially watch a film through a different lens, right? We read a book if we read it again, which have I ever done? Probably. We read it through different lenses that have been informed by our experiences over time. And when you ask people stuff, just broadly about anything, people move from positions of like high certainty to uncertainty. And what Chris and Reem showed is that happens within the space of one interview. And what I'm trying to show in my data is that also happens over the space of several interviews over time. Does that make sense? Cool. So please read that, because it's a really interesting paper. And this is essentially the framework in which I'm working on with Chris. Really straightforward. Just get to know the people that you're working with. It's honestly that simple. Like, if we want to know what people think, feel, how they care, how they perceive a topic, get to know them. I can't believe how much stuff I've done before, and I now continue to read, where it's just so obvious the participants are complete strangers to the researchers. It just makes no sense, really, when you think about it. Just think about how artificial and weird and uncomfortable a job interview feels. And we all know we're just playing the game, all right? And I try to say to students that if you don't get these things right when you're trying to interview participants, you're just putting them in those same kind of uncomfortable artificial environments, and then you expect them to say anything of any meaning that really reflects what they think about something, right? So just get to know the people that you're working with. Ideally, have some kind of shared understanding of what they're talking about, right? It's all about social interactions. Basic example, I'll probably talk about this very differently. If some of the people that were online now and I can't see their faces, if they were sat present right now, I might be speaking about this very differently. I'd certainly be sweating a lot more. But it's a social context. We derive meaning about the world through social interaction, through symbolic interaction. So Herbert Bloom's idea that the way we interpret objects, anything about the world, is through a social interaction. So yeah, get to know the people you are working with. So I don't know if anybody of you noticed on the first slide, but I had that picture. Who do you think that is? Yes, how do you know, Ryden? Can you tell by the nose? I thought that was the obvious bit for me. But yeah, that's me. That's my brain. As far as further hospitals say, that's a healthy looking brain, which I'm a bit skeptical of. But the reason why I have that up there is because just what I've been talking about, shared understanding, that's part of my position as a researcher. I have what Merton would call the insider status. I've been there. I've probably been concussed 6 times playing rugby, getting kicked in the head, kneed in the head, either in training or in games. We're not saying do that as part of your research methodology. It's just that gives us a very unique position, okay? Basically a personal involvement of that specific context. When I'm talking to people, I can see in the data, like when players and participants will say something like, "Oh, you know me, you've played with me, you know what I'm like, I know what you're like," etc., etc. Just very basic, blatant examples of this insider status. It's very obvious. It's very obvious. If you don't know anything about the context, you're just going to lose the people that you're working with. To use a football cliche, you lose the dressing room, right? We have to build trust. We have to build rapport with the people that we're trying to understand. How would you say rapport in Norwegian? Overens? Is that the right word? How would you say that? Like, if we have an overens, it means we're getting on, right? If we basically, huh? Yeah, overens. What? Isn't that what I said?
Yes.
Bloody hell. Right. That's what I mean. And therefore, we understand and accept that these things it's an intersubjective understanding, right? If I'm talking to Armand about something, the way we're understanding and processing whatever we're talking about, it's shared. It's somewhere kind of in between us. We have to use a certain language to be able to understand each other. When I mean language, I don't mean English and Norwegian. I mean specific to the context. So yeah, I have that. I have that intersubjective understanding of what it's like to have your brain rattled and then carry on playing, and then try to drive home when you can't see. I've been there. I've worn the t-shirt, and that's really important. So even though it's kind of amusing to have that slide up of my brain, I hope you can understand the key message there of that the only way you're able to get certain data, I would say, based on my own data, is if you've got this insider status. There's various contexts that you lot could be an insider to, but I'm a complete outsider to. Obviously, the most obvious one is something to do with Norwegian schools. I don't know anything about it. I've never been to one. Okay, I've got very limited understanding of that context. So that's me, innit? Okay, that picture of those images, those MRI scans represent me, a 37-year-old. 37. Wait, am I? I'm 37 next month. British male rugby coach. Okay. I've had several hospitalisations with brain injury from playing games or training in this contact sport. And it's instrumental into the data that I've got. So, what did I do? Several interviews basically over a long time. Started in 2023, finished some of my interviews towards the back end of last year. Still in contact with some participants now. I'll get onto that in a minute. And hopefully you've noticed there's 35 interviews and only 15 participants. And obviously that looks like I've interviewed everybody twice. Not necessarily. Some people only once, some people up to 4 times. It depends on what they want to say and what they want to explore. A lot of the times those follow-up interviews have been initiated by the participant. They might have sent me a link about a podcast or a news article, as I shared at the start. And I say, would you like to talk more about it? And they say, yeah. Or they just, sometimes I've had participants say, we need to talk. And it's my ethical obligation as someone who's initiated potentially these thoughts and ideas to be there to hear that. So that's hopefully why you notice there's lots more interviews than there is participants. And it's just conversations, right? It's not a job interview. Okay, data collection or data production can still be a conversation. But within that conversation, because they trust me, they know me, they've played with me, they've literally bled with me, some of these people, I'm able to push them on things. I'm able to push, like Reem did in her paper, you said this, but what do you actually mean? Because I've seen you do something different, or you said this, but 10 minutes ago you just said the opposite. Or in interview 2, you said this, now what are you saying to me? So I can push and probe and dwell with the participants because of this idea that understanding's a process. Okay, it's a recursive thing. It goes over time, it's moving, it's not static. Okay, if we only use surveys, we're making the assumption that understanding of a topic is static and cross-sectional studies are useful. I'm not saying cross-sectional studies are not useful. I don't mind pointing out Tom Eric, but for this type of topic, it's not. Okay, so broadly what we're trying to do is use Bloom's ideas. Okay, the research has the obligation of making the concept match up with the circumstances rather than making the data fit the concept. We're just exploring. Basically, we're just talking to people we already know and have shared experiences with. We're doing it over time and just seeing what emerges from the data. You can strip all the literature and all the fancy words away, but it's as simple as that. So you've got Bloomer from the University of Chicago, Howard Becker, and I'm probably confusing the two now, but I'm certain it was Becker who basically talks about this idea of intimate familiarity. And all that means is like, who do you know best? Who do you know best in the world? Who do you know how do you know what certain people are thinking, how they tick, what decisions they might make based on a certain response? It's family, right? Okay? We know how our spouse, our siblings, our kids, we know how they work. We know how they think about things broadly. Why? Because we're always with them, always spending time with them. Remember, that's not me saying go live with your participants, unless you're an anthropologist, maybe, but just get to know your people who you are trying to understand something with. Because when we do, we get some really powerful, really useful and interesting data. And for me, I think interviews, and you got to remember, I'm someone who started doing research about heart rate apps and the reliability of heart rate apps on smartphones. And I've completely moved away from that. But I've been your kind of traditional sports scientist, your traditional, I guess, positivist. But now, I kind of reflected on that and that kind of stuff, and this might be controversial, but like when we do loads of sports science stuff, I honestly don't think the participants benefit much from it. I've participated in like sleep deprivation studies, followed by like 45 minutes of cycling at a certain percentage of VO2 max. I did not benefit one bit from that, from not sleeping for 8 hours and then exercising till exhaustion. The point I'm trying to make is I feel like if we get interviews right, we get qualitative data right, we get our projects managed well, they act like interventions anyway. And this is kind of what I want to show in some of my data. Obviously, I'm not going to read this in detail, but hopefully you can see how these ideas around when to take themselves off a pitch because they think they might have got a brain injury, how that changes over time, how that changes when I might push and probe. And the best example of that for this was just coming up in a conversation with a participant on WhatsApp. And I can't remember what they mentioned, but I sent them the quote at the bottom. And they just said, "Who's that dickhead?" And I said, "That's you." "Oh, really? I said that? Okay, I think we need to talk because my ideas have changed." "Yeah, sure." And then, as the participant says at the bottom, I remember reading just thinking, yeah, what a dick. And this is a process that's taken like 18 months for that person to maybe go, yeah, do you know what? Maybe the next time I bang my head, I'll just take myself off, rather than thinking, what are the implications of playing on? That's just one example. But the main point is, using this kind of epistemological framework, using this methodology, this immersive methodology, we're going to get this kind of data. The same here. You got someone thinking about potentially retiring over the course of 4 interviews. And again, those follow-up interviews are initiated by the participant. When we give people the time for space to think and dwell and reflect on their own ideas, you'll find that often they might change because they're transient, they're changing, they're moving. I think the phrase Ream and Chris use in their paper is this idea of epistemological space, giving people the space to essentially reflect on what they're doing or what they're thinking. So very broadly, that data is not written up yet, but it's essentially a rugby version of what Ream and Chris did. It's how understanding things about brain injury, their conceptions and understanding of risk, their ability to think long term is transient. I couldn't think of a good translation for transient. Flickty? Oblicky? It's like it's moving, it's flea tender. I can't think of a good word. But is it? Okay, because I thought that was more related to like if you're sick or move in traffic. So do I get your approval? Yes, there we go. Right, meeting over. Let's go, let's finish. But yeah, that's our understanding of brain injury in sport, how we could describe it. And broadly, the only way we can do that or capture that is if we actually immerse ourselves within the social context. So Liston, who writes about brain injury in rugby and education, how we can basically improve people's health, it's not just about the message, okay? These one-size-fits-all messages about health, it's an oversimplification. It's also about who is delivering the message. And I've got that, right? My position as someone who's sustained brain injury, who coaches the sport, who's into the sport for decades, I'm probably it's the only reason I've been able to get the data I've got, essentially. And some of my participants have confirmed that to me in like WhatsApp conversations. So I guess that's it, really. Just in summary, get to know who you're working with. I don't think that's a bad suggestion, no matter what type of project you're doing. The amount of times I've been involved in more, I guess, physiological projects, and you're doing testing, and then the participant says something at the end, and you just think, oh, right, wow, okay, that's completely undermined the entire project. If we'd given them the space to listen to them before we started, the projects probably would have changed. Right, so what am I doing with this stuff? Just to kind of plug some of my bits. So we've now just fully formalised touch rugby in Norway. So we have a forbundet, a governing body, for touch rugby, excuse me, in Norway. I am, I guess, the vice president. Oh God, sounds like JD Vance. But I'm the Nesta Liar. But essentially, I've initiated that. And the reason, really, fundamentally, that's come about is because of the data I've collected and my understanding, my somewhat broad understanding of brain injury. There are spaces to play non-contact versions of traditional sports that were invented in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's one bit. I am now a member of the Verening, trying to form a Lokallager, like a local group in Sogndal for that. It's not just related to sport, just related to concussion. It's not clinical or medical support. It's more like, I guess, like a social support group. They meet up, they talk about it, they talk about work, etc. And then finally, I guess more important, I'm really trying to push these methods to our students. All of my master's students are now qualitative in nature. You saw Christopher as one of the authors on that paper about surveys. Okay, he's not been talking about head injury, but what he's taken from these ideas is this concept of like pushing and probing participants. Basically, the only reason we got what we got in that survey paper is because of Christopher's really good ability to basically listen to what a participant said and say, actually, are you sure you mean that? And just push him that little bit more. As soon as you ask somebody why more than once, a lot of the times their ideas change or they collapse or they crumble. And then very, very specifically, one of the master's projects from last year is Harris, who essentially his entire project was based on Reem and Chris's paper. What's really good about that is he's now gone away reflecting on his own position as someone who coaches kickboxing in Norway, and it's changed his practice. And his interview data showed how the coaches and the participants he interviewed, they changed their practice. Interviewing them twice showed that some people said, oh yeah, I went away and after you interviewed me, I went and did some research and I've decided to put some posters up in the gym about symptoms of concussion. And that goes back to a point I was making about the interview almost becomes an intervention in itself. So there, in summary, in conclusion, there, I guess, my practical applications of what my methods are leading to. Yeah, I guess that's it.